Chapter 2 of the Hampstead Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Lars Rolander. The Hampstead Mystery by John R. Watson and Arthur G. Rees. Chapter 2. 6:30 edition. High Court Judge murdered. It was not quite 5 p.m., but the enterprising section of the London evening newspapers had their 6:30 editions on sale in the streets. To such a pitch had the policy of giving the public what had once been elevated that the halfpenny newspapers were able to give the people of London the news each afternoon, a full 90 minutes before the edition was supposed to have left the press. The time of the edition was boldly printed in the top right-hand corner of each paper as a guarantee of enterprise, if not of good faith. On practical enterprise of this kind does journalism forge ahead. Some people who have been bred up in a conservative atmosphere sneer at such journalistic enterprise. They affect to regard as unreliable the up-to-date news contained in newspapers which are unable to tell the truth about the hands of the clock. From the cries of the newsboys and from the announcements of the newspaper bills which they displayed, it was assumed by those with a greedy appetite for sensations that a judge of the High Court had been murdered on the bench. Such an appetite easily swallowed the difficulty created by the fact that the law courts had been closed for the long vacation. In imagination they saw a dramatic scene in court. The disappointed, demented, desperate litigant suddenly drawing a revolver and with unerring aim shooting the judge through the brain before the deadly weapon could be wrenched from his hands. But though the sensation created by the murder of a judge of the High Court was destined to grow and to be fed by unexpected developments, the changing phases of which monopolised public attention throughout England on successive occasions, there was little in the evening papers to satisfy the appetite for sensation. In journalistic vernacular, they were late in getting on to it, and therefore their reference to the crime occupied only a few lines in the stop press news beneath some late horse racing results. The Evening Courier, which was first in the streets with the news, made its announcement of the crime in the following brief paragraph: "The dead body of Sir Horace Fewbanks, the distinguished High Court judge, was found by the police at his home, Riverbrook, in Tanton Gardens, Hampstead, today. Deceased had been shot through the heart. The police have no doubt that he was murdered." But the morning papers of the following day did full justice to the sensation. It was the month of August, when Parliament is up, the law courts closed for the long vacation, and when everybody who is anybody is out of London for the summer holidays. News was scarce, and the papers vied with one another in making the utmost of the murder of a High Court judge. Each of the morning papers sent out a man to Hampstead soon after the news of the crime reached their offices in the afternoon, and some of the more enterprising sent 2 or 3 men. Scotland Yard and Riversbrook were visited by a succession of pressmen, representing the London dailies, the provincial press, and the news agencies. The 2 points on which the newspaper accounts of the tragedy laid stress were the mysterious letter which had been sent to Scotland Yard stating that Sir Horace Fewbanks had been murdered, and the mystery surrounding the sudden return of Sir Horace from Scotland to his town house. On the first point there was room for much varied speculation. Why was information about the murder sent to Scotland Yard, and why was it sent in a disguised way? If the person who had sent this letter had no connection with the crime and was anxious to help the police, why had he not gone to Scotland Yard personally and told the detectives all he knew about the tragedy? If, on the other hand, he was implicated in the crime, why had he informed the police at all? It would have been to his interest as an accomplice, even if he had been an unwilling accomplice, to leave the crime undiscovered as long as possible, so that he and those with whom he had been associated might make their escape to another country. But he had sent his letter to Scotland Yard within a few hours of the perpetration of the crime, and had not given the actual murderer time to get out of England. Was he not afraid of the vengeance the actual murderer would endeavour to exact for this disclosure, which would enable the police to take measures to prevent his escape? No light was thrown on the cause of the murdered man's sudden return from the grouse shooting in Scotland. The newspaper accounts, though they differed greatly in their statements, surmises and suggestions concerning the tragedy, agreed on the point that Sir Horace had been a keen sportsman and was a very fine shot. In years past he had made a practice of spending the early part of the long vacation in Scotland, going there for the opening of the grouse season on the 12th of August. This year he had been one of a party of 5 who had rented Craigleith Hall in the Western Highlands, and after 5 days' shooting he had announced that he had to go to London on urgent business, but would return in the course of a week or less. It was suggested in some of the newspapers' accounts that an explanation of the cause of his return might throw some light on the murder. Inquiries were being made at Craigleith Hall to ascertain the reason for his journey to London, or whether any telegram had been received by him previous to his departure. The fact that one of the windows on the ground floor of Riversbrook had been found open was regarded as evidence that the murderer had broken into the house. Imprints of footsteps had been found in the ground outside the window, and the police had taken several casts of these. But whether the man who had broken into the house with the intention of committing burglary or murder was a matter on which speculation differed. If the murderer was a criminal who had broken into the house with the intention of committing a burglary, there could be no connection between the return of Sir Horace Fewbanks from Scotland and his murder. The burglary had probably been arranged in the belief that the house was empty, Sir Horace having sent the servants away to his country house in Delmer a week before. But if the murderer was a burglar, he had stolen nothing and had not even collected any articles for removal. The only thing that was known to be missing was the dead man's pocketbook, but there was nothing to prove that the murderer had stolen it. It was quite possible that it had been lost or mislaid by Sir Horace. It was even possible that it had been stolen from him in the train during the journey from Scotland. It might be that while prowling through the rooms after breaking into the house, and before he had collected any goods for removal, the burglar had come unexpectedly on Sir Horace, and after shooting him had fled from the house. Only as a last resort to prevent capture did burglars commit murder. Had Sir Horace been shot while attempting to seize the intruder? The position in which the body was found did not support that theory. 2 shots had been fired, the first of which had missed its victim and entered the wall of the library. Evidently the murdered man had been hit by the second while attempting to leave the room. It was ingeniously suggested by the Daily Record that the murderer was a criminal who knew Sir Horace, and was known to him as a man who had been before him at the Old Bailey. This would account for Sir Horace being ruthlessly shot down without having made any attempt to seize the intruder. The burglar would have felt on seeing Sir Horace in the room that he was identified, and the only way of escaping ultimate arrest by the police was to kill the man who could put the police on his track. Mr. Justice Fewbanks had had the reputation of being a somewhat severe judge, and it was possible that some of the criminals who had been sentenced by him at Old Bailey entertained a grudge against him. The question of when the murder was committed was regarded as important. Dr.